Well, well, well. I'm back again on the Interstice podcast, and this is episode 51. So thank you for whoever listens to this, for sticking with me in the times that I align and orient my life to be able to do all these things that I want to do. And I can never say that I will not fail and that there won't be times where I've gone without creating enough content. This is a tired thing for somebody who does podcasts or YouTube channels to say, but it still is worth saying that you will recommit and you will get back up. And that's what I'm doing here. You don't give up because you've done some kind of failure. You accept that you did it and then you move on. We are reinventing ourselves in every moment, in every slice of time. So here we are in episode 51. I've got people I've already talked to that would like to come on the podcast. And I've got a bunch of things like endless in the time that I've not uploaded anything to the podcast that could be great for conversation. So today we're going to jump right in and we're going to talk about an author that I read for the first time, one of his books, and it's Haruki Murakami. And I've heard so much about him, and he seems to have had such a huge impact on so many people's lives. And I especially noticed when I came to Japan, maybe because he is this quite famous Japanese named author, so you hear about it more. But then I had a friend here, Sandro. He's actually been on the podcast before, and he's a huge fan of his work. And for me, this last winter, he gave to me Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. This is one of the really, really famous books that Murakami does. And of course, I wanted to have a crack at it. Now, I have a very strict policy about when I read how it's going to go. And that's to say that while we're reading, we can't help but form judgments. That's what we do. We're judging creatures. We have to assess. And there's a big trap, a big pitfall waiting for you, I think, when you read any book, that if you do not read it to its completion, you could misjudge it. And I'm so happy that I have this policy in place that if I'm going to cast a judgment of any value on something in regards to what I read, they have to complete it, because this was especially one of those cases where I would say that when I had started reading, that by the end of it, my opinion of it completely changed. Now, I want to give like a full warning here, spoilers. I'm going to talk about elements of the book and my interpretation of them that takes you... It spoils some of the details that you might be suspicious of at the beginning, but then you realize towards the end what's going on. So if you're not in for that, then jump to the next half hour of this podcast where I'll discuss something different. But for now, that's what I'm going to go into. And it was cool because what was in this book was a thought that had occurred to me before, something that I like to consider. But then after reading the book, where I enjoyed so much the point that was being made, I really enjoyed and was able to then expand on for my own thinking, where I think I may have cracked the universe. So that's good. You know, it's useful information. I feel like it puts your mind at ease in a lot of ways. Never saying at all that I know anything for certain, but I was like, all of these things linked together in a really compelling way, which I can't ignore. And if it's only for myself and the 10 people who listen to this, it's a curious little nugget of information, definitely, when I reflected on it. So let's jump right into it. The way that the book's constructed and kind of what the big, it's not a twist, but a big reveal, you might say, in the book that you finally arrive to. So I'll set it up for you. You've got this really, really interesting world or two worlds, I should say, that take place in this book. So you've got this guy, I can't even remember if he has a name, but you got the main character, and he is this really interesting, you might call agent or employee of something that's called he's a computech, so like technical computations, and he works for this one group. And then there is this other group in opposition to them. So like he works for this system, but they always have to watch out for the agents of this other group. And he's able to do this really, really fascinating thing where he can be counting numbers simultaneously on the left and right hand side of his brain. I believe it's called shuffling in the book. And so you have on the left hand, he'll be counting coins and adding them up, and then he'll have coins in the right hand, and he'll be counting those coins and adding them up, and he can do so simultaneously, and it creates this sort of foreshadowing for what becomes known even within, I believe, the second chapter, and that's that as you read this book, there's two worlds. There's the world of our main character that you learn can do this kind of interesting calculation, and then there is this other more surreal world where you're not exactly sure what's going on, why this guy is here, what are the rules of this world, and what's happening within it, and you're going to slowly come to understand that over the course of the book and how it relates to the what seems as a more concrete, as we would know it, world of the first storyline that you start with. So the big revelation is essentially that this second world that you are reading about is actually, it is a world within that main character's mind, and it's a world that was created as of a surgery or operation that he went under to be able to allow him to do this kind of calculation that he does in his head, where his left and right brain are split. But then it makes sense, that was the symbolism for his left and his right having two separate worlds. You might say the left brain is the more concrete world, the right brain is this one in which he inhabits this interesting town where it seems there are unicorns, and when he is finally given a task to complete, his role in this town, it's that he is to read the old dreams, and that process involves him going to this librarian, and it involves him handling these skulls, and these skulls contain within them these old dreams, and he, by interacting with them, is able to release these dreams from the skulls. And you're not exactly sure what does that mean? Why is he releasing them, or like what's the purpose of releasing them? You just know that that's his task that he has to complete. So why I said that my opinion changed a lot was that when I was first reading it, I've encountered it before where books become so surreal that even for me, where I like that kind of thing, it's so unattached to any sort of reality or symbolism or greater meaning that I can see, and their only purpose is for you to have a kind of emotional reaction. It doesn't really do it for me, because I like my brain, whatever it is, likes to have a purpose attached to things. And so, just going to be checking my clock every so often here because I don't want the video to run out. That doesn't do it for me, because I want to take something from a narrative other than the emotional experience of it. The emotional experience is so much better if that is compounded by some kind of purpose. I'm like, that purpose is incredible. That gives me a satisfying emotional reaction. And when at first I couldn't see any connection between these worlds, or the point behind what was happening in either of them, or what did the second world, what was it a symbol of, it didn't really land that well for me. But as the book goes on, you start to understand that something really interesting. So this is a concept that I've always said to people, if you consider, is really, really interesting, and maybe the first example that we have where you can envision yourself as omniscient, and that's when we're dreaming. So when you dream, it is fun to consider that usually within our dreams there is self. There's you, like you might imagine yourself in your everyday life, and it's that self that experiences a dream. But we should observe, we should note that even as you experience that voice in a dream, there is an entire world that is created around you to occupy in your dreams, and that world and its creation and in all its characters are no less you than the self that is experiencing the dream. So let's put it another way, is that when you are in a dream and speaking to someone, that person who is speaking to you is you, because it's your mind that creates everything within this world. So every part of this world is you. It's just that because we so identify with a self, with a narrative ego voice, that we might forget that this isn't anything other than us. at every single level of perspective, as the first person, as the I, as the omniscient voice that's creating all of the other things in our dreams. That's really cool. And that, I say, is an example of how you might feel yourself, what it's like to be omniscient, because you are that whole world. You're totally aware of it, even though you're still aware of yourself as the main character or whatever in the dream. But then that might be what it's like if you were a part of a greater whole, because you can't experience it as a self to be a part of the greater whole. The greater whole is just distributed. The whole consciousness is distributed across that like world that gets created. So in this book, that dream world you discover, it operates in very much the same way, where you have him as the main character is in the first story, which is concrete and which is in the, quotes, real world. And there's that character in the dream world. But then you come to realize all these characters that he's been meeting, there's a colonel, there's a librarian, there's the animals, there's like these unicorns, there's all of these different creatures, all of the structures, everything that exists within this dreamlike world is him. And I thought that was so crazy, because this is the first time I've ever encountered in the book someone using that concept, which I've just described, which is to observe how you are both the world and the character within it in our own dreams, that this guy put into a book, that concept, and I really, really liked it. And then this got me to thinking. This got me to thinking about existence as a whole. And I thought about it this way. So in our dreams, there's you, and there's the world that you're creating, and it's all the same thing. So if we thought about this for our own lives, you think about the world in which we inhabit, and you might say that the world in which we inhabit is the dream world. I'll try and build this up, see if we can see if I can follow along with my own reasoning, let alone you poor soul. So you think about it this way. When you walk around the planet Earth, when you are in this universe, that's essentially like you are in a dream, and everything that you see around you is the dream world. Now, how is it similar to like when we have our dreams at night? Well, just like everything in that dream, whether it be yourself or whether it be the world you're creating, is all made of the same stuff. It's all made of your brain's experience of dreaming, therefore the same material. This world that we occupy is no different in that sense, in that we are all made of atoms. So I am made of the fundamental building blocks of this universe that surrounds me, in just the same way that in the dream, whether I'm the character or the world, it's all made of the same fundamental building blocks. It's all the same system, you might say. So whether I am myself as I've come to emerge from reality as Dave, or if you took all of my atoms and distributed them, say for example in death, nothing has changed in the system, or nothing has entered from outside the system. It's still the same system. And so I was thinking of this in terms of death and what it might mean, in that when you die, you redistribute back into that system, and in a very real sense become a part of the world again. You're not the single voice, but you are still a part of the world, because you don't leave the world. Like we could see that. All of your pieces that made up you, they rot and they decompose and they become all the different elements and materials and minerals, and they get recycled back into the system. And so I was thinking about maybe that could be this sort of, like I'm talking about this experience of like omnipresence that you have in your dream, where you are the world that's created there. Maybe that's what it's like when you die, because you have all this redistribution of yourself back into the system. And so now that you don't have the illusion of self, there is some experience of being part of the whole again. And when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, they're really no different. I mean, one is this mini dream. You're like, one is a dream world, but then is this not the same kind of dream world. It's like in your dream world, you emerge as a consciousness into that dream world, but you're still made of the same stuff. It's your brain's experience of reality in your dream, and then the world around you is still you. And then in the real world, you emerge from this system that allows you to have a self, and the rest of the world around you, the sort of like permeability that we seem separate from it is an illusion, because we are made up of all the same pieces that construct everything around us. And when we die, we return back into that system. I thought that that was a really compelling thought. I have no idea what that means for what your sense of what sense of existence is that. I feel like there's something kind of interesting there and linked in the way in our dreams that when I experience the first person voice, the I in my dreams, and I have to look across at that person, I only know about it being me in the aftermath, and still from the aftermath of the dream, and it is still limited even as I make that acknowledgement that I am both the dream and the dreamer, like the dream within it, or you within the dream, that because you have a first person, an I, that can make that observation, it doesn't really give you the feeling yet of what it's like to be the world. I can only observe that I'm the world from a first person with a self. If that, I hope that makes sense. Maybe I can rephrase it. It's like I'm limited to noticing that I am the whole world by still having to observe that fact as a self. And so that's another illusion. It's like, how could you really appreciate what it is to be the whole world that's created in your dream, or in this that we exist now, if you can only do so as a self? I think that when you have a self, when you have the voice that says I, it actually is limiting, because it is all filtered through an ego. An ego is incapable of seeing things other than as I. But we can still observe that it could be otherwise. We know that it's otherwise. We know that the rest of ourselves is that dream. But we only see it from the perspective of, oh, I am the whole dream, as opposed to dream, just this like the experience of not having a self. Now, I know that people get close to this apparently when they do things like psychedelics. Maybe that's some kind of experience when people do that they could offer more informed opinion than of what I have now, which is that, oh, actually, experiencing existence without a self feels like this. That I think that could be possible. But then again, it becomes a little bit cyclical. It's like you can only talk about this with any sort of accuracy if you were not a self, because then that person who's had a psychedelic experience, which now knows what it's like to describe experience or to experience without a self, is now again returned to a perspective of self to relay that to you. So you can only experience or understand what that is as you experience it, because it'll always be at odds with trying to explain it as a self, because a self is not the whole. It can't do it. I know that as not even a little convoluted, a lot convoluted. I could have my ideas better organized, but I hope that you can take a grain of some meaning from what I've had to say regarding that. And it makes me really, really excited about considering what we may discover as time goes on. Is there a way to go into these states that it doesn't matter if you return to a state of self, that you just know, you're like, I can't describe it, and in fact it's locked off from me until I am again in that state, but you would know it's there, even though you wouldn't be able to talk about it anymore. I think a useful sort of comparison that you could make for this, and it's perfect, it actually is perfect to make this same point, is when you talk about things in terms of dimensionality, that being like 1D, 2D, 3D, and then, they say like fourth dimensional is like time or whatever. It's that when they use dimensions to basically describe the idea that if you are on a two-dimensional plane, you cannot conceive of the third dimensional because you're locked from perceiving in that dimensionality. And so it may be in the same way that so long as you are a self, that self is a kind of dimensionality that prevents you from observing what this more omnipresent experience would be like. I think I've actually done a decent job there of getting this idea out of my head. So, really cool. It was in the book that near the end he's talking about this world and coming to this realization that it is his dream, and he realizes that the town is him, and then the river that runs through this town runs through him because he is the river. He realizes that the Colonel is him. I think there is some connection. It's revealed quite later on in the book that he had a wife that left him. And it's my sense that this librarian who helps him in the dream world, helps him with his job, is quite compassionate towards him. It's his understanding, it's his wife. And it's kind of cool where I thought, well, that's a shame though, because it's only a projection of what she's like. It's not actually her. But then you get into this really interesting headspace where you realize that's all someone is to you. You can't know them actually because you only have your subjective reality that shows you who they are. So it's actually irrelevant that it's not actually her in the dream because it is her in the way that we have to experience each other. You can only experience someone in your subjective reality. So whether it was actually her beamed into his dream world doesn't matter because that's how we always experience things. There was never actually herself that was ever interacting with him. It was always his brain's illusion or like brain's manifestation of like the inputs that he receives. It's kind of like this idea, if that might sound a little bit strange to you, if you think about the world being everything that you're doing right now as you sit, as you listen to this, it is colored by your subjective reality. You're listening to me, but in some sense you're just listening to yourself because you're listening to yourself's translation of, call it, all the inputs that you have, and whether that input is vibration being my voice, it's the sensations around you, it's your brain creating reality. And so you don't ever actually truly interact with reality, you interact with the reality that your brain is creating for you. And so in this same way, he's reacting with truly who his wife was, because it is definitely the same thing as when he was actually with her, which is that whether in the real world it's an illusion or whether it's in his dream it's an illusion, it's always your brain creating reality. So you come away with this like, oh, well, is one world so different from the other? Because in what we perceive as the real world, we're still creating it in this very unreal way. It's our brain that goes about interpreting light, creating an image, our emotions in response to the different inputs that we have. It's all a simulation. And so there was just incredible, compelling thoughts that came out of this book, which I only sort of started to comprehend and get as I moved towards the, say, 3/4 of it and then towards the end of the book. The other thing that I would talk about, which was really, really cool, and it's amazing how fast a half an hour just went by. That was kind of bizarre, actually. What was the idea that was in it? Yes, so something else that he hits on, and this is like, oh, okay, I've heard a few people say this, but now I totally get it. They didn't exactly say it like this to me, but I think I can refine it more. So people often talk about Murakami feeling highly relatable. And I was like, okay, what does that mean exactly when somebody's highly relatable? Is it that they just talk about experiences that are universal, and so because he talks about so many universal experiences, and there's so many universal experiences that we share as human beings, hope, loss, love, joy, all these things, we share them, but then that to me feels less personal. That's just a sort of humanism that you relate to everybody. But what I discovered, and I think I put my finger on the button of it now, is that he finds a way to relate to you in a way that you felt, well, okay, let me start that again. It feels relatable because you come across instances in what he writes where it feels like what is relatable is limited to you. So I would read something and think, I thought I was the only person who ever felt that. I have all sorts of shared experiences, but some of the ones that make me feel most like me, this Dave inside this head, is that I'm the only one who gets to have that. That was me, and it's weird, and it's life, and that forms kind of like my core of who I am. But then I'm reading, and I'm seeing instances where I realize that this wasn't limited to me, and that some other human being has had the same incredibly personal, and I thought impossibly personal experience, and that was really, really cool. And it seems to be that that's what it is for people. It's not just that it's relatable, it's that it relates so particularly to them, and that was really, really incredible. Before we go into the second half of the podcast, there was one other detail that I really, really liked, and I thought this was just great. It's an understandable symbolism where I was like, I've never heard it put quite like that, where it was talking about in the dream world, at one point, the main character looks out the window, and he sees all of these old men, and they're digging holes. And he asks, I believe the librarian, who's supposed to be representative of his wife, asks her, what are they doing? Why are they digging holes? And she says, well, they're not digging for any reason, actually. They're just digging holes. And in some sense, that makes them a very pure hole. And I thought this is basically talking about the things that we think in our lives have such purpose, maybe our entire lives, in fact, that we dedicate all this effort and work to, but really it's going nowhere. It's just something that we choose to do it, but there's a part of ourselves that is not acknowledging it is for nothing. You might say again, our whole lives. Whole lives. Hey, there you go. Pun intended. That was fun. So, great book. Really, really good. I don't know if I'd immediately jump into another one that he would do right away. I'm on to another thing now, but I enjoyed it immensely, and probably most of all within the last 50 pages or so. So give books a chance. Always get to the end of them, and I think that's how you can best enjoy them, because they can only be considered in their whole unless they're just absolutely brutal, and some books suck, and that's the way it goes. All right, that's our first half here. We're going to jump into the second, and let's see what we get on to now. Okay, I made a few notes to make sure. There was a few things I wanted to talk about. So let's go light. Let's give your brain, you did the hard reps. Now we're going to take that 2 minutes off to be able to recover from me saying, dream, self-dream, dream, self-dream, dream. And we can relax a little bit and just talk about cool places that you might visit in Japan that I have gone to recently. And then we'll return to some of the health and mental things again that are cool. I got a couple of really good ones. I think they'll be useful. I think you'll like them. So I've talked about, if you had left off on the podcasts before, it was talking about a lot to do with just how incredible it's been in Kyoto. I love it here. Very, very, very special city. Big time. Now, that also means that I'm in the Kansai region, where there's so much to explore here south of Kyoto, just as above, just as below. When you're in the Kanto region and you would go up north, and there's all the cool places, you would go there. So one of the places that I went to, I was invited by a great friend of mine and a business collaborator as well, Chai. Great guy. So Chai loves to travel. You wouldn't believe the stories that the more you talk to him, you're like how many countries have you been to, man? And he'll go out of his way to explore and adventure and basically go places that people wouldn't. Yeah, if it was considered a dangerous region or town and against advisory to go there, he will. Now, where it's easy to say that, well, I don't know if that's the best choice in the world, it is still a choice that somebody can make. And if you come back from that, well, there's no denying that you may have gone through something that very, very few people will have ever, because of the risks associated with it. Now, that's not what we were doing, but we did something of the more gentle variety for me, exploring Kansai. So if you look it up, it's this really, really cool place. It's called Kinosaki. And Kinosaki, I've been in Japan now for, I was counting it up, came here in 2013, so 9 years? Oh no, it's been 9 years. That's wild. So one more year and then I can get permanent residency and do a bunch of other cool stuff. I hadn't done that much exploring around the Kansai region, and I've never ever gone to what amounts to an onsen town. So in Japan, let me paint you a picture. They have these towns where they will have half a dozen different onsens. And if I'm speaking to the uninitiated, an onsen is basically a bathhouse. And to be a real, true blue onsen, you have to be occurring naturally. It's like from these thermal vents or whatever that heat the water. They have a minerality in them because of that that's supposed to be really, really good for your skin. You can go to bathhouses in Japan where people might still call them an onsen, but it's just a bathtub. It's not that they're using natural water or anything like that. So Kinosaki is about a 2-hour trip by train to the Sea of Japan side. So if you went basically like north of Kyoto, that's the direction that you would be going. And once there, they have, as I say, about a half a dozen different onsens that you can visit. And the things that we saw there, I can't even, it's so idyllic, so picturesque, beautiful. And I would say the number one that most impressed me in terms of its visual element was it was a place where you go in and you do the usual stuff. You have your bath, you get clean before you're going to go into the water. That's all standard stuff. But then it was the actual baths themselves that were so impressive. So this onsen, where I'm used to being indoors, if I do any one of these ones, it was outside, and there's all these rock formations that you can sit in and enjoy like a happy monkey. And it was next to a waterfall. So you're bathing in this incredibly warm, silky water because of the minerals within it that's super hot. And your view is of a waterfall that's pouring down on you as you sit there and relax. Name me something more incredible. I'm sure there's a few. In fact, I'm going to talk about one in the course of this podcast before we finish. But it was great. Great opportunity to get to know Chai better. We had some more friends out too. That was absolutely awesome. And I'm forgetting to mention, I could have started with this. We stayed at a firehouse that had been adapted into a hotel in a really cool kind of schwanky way. The rooms were modern but traditional, like modern in the sense that it was like everything was brand new, totally renovated, but then many of the rooms had tatami in them and stuff. So that was pretty cool. And you had beautiful art all over the place. Like there was a cafe downstairs that you could go into. Now, at first I was kind of hesitant to do this, but one of the things that you're supposed to do is you take off all your clothes. You knew that already. It's a bathhouse. But actually, it's what you put on. So there's like this cool robe. It's like 3 different layers, where you may have heard of yukata. That's like a summer robe that you can put on as you're chilling in all the summer heat and humidity that you find here. But this was more layered than that. It was like a comfy, thicker robe, then a lighter, and then an even further lighter. And they have these huge sort of billowy, almost like Jedi sleeves that, for pockets, it's these sleeves hang down so far from your wrists that you can put anything that you might have with you into the sleeves and store them there. And you've got your little handbag with your towels and stuff, and everybody walks around the city wearing these cool robes. It's just a weird thing to see, like, everybody going around in there, but essentially to me is like fancy pajamas while you go and you check out these different onsens that you're going into. It was funny, one of the guy there, our host, nicest guy in the world, but he was like, oh, you don't want to go to this one. This is the best onsen that you could go to. Don't go to, but this one you shouldn't go to. It's like way too big. Like, okay, that sounds kind of sweet, actually. So it was one of the last ones that we went to, and it was awesome. The one that he said was absolute shit. He was like, no, it's not that good. It was great. I loved it. It had this really, really cool dry sauna where usually you just sit like this, like standard as you would in any sort of like backed chair. But this one you could sit, and then behind you the wood planks were tilted in such a way that you could kind of like lay down as though you were in like a lazy boy or something like that. I love the hot sauna so much, the hot dry sauna. I've come to appreciate, if you really want to sweat it out and you're trying to do this as a kind of sport or like you're going to the gym, then where I used to think it was the hot, dry sauna that would get the most out of you in terms of sweat and filtering your system, it's actually the hot baths by a large margin. So where I would go in before, I'd finish in onsen, and I'd lose about 1 kilogram by the time I came out. As soon as I started incorporating into the onsens the hot baths, then I was losing like another 0.5 of a kilogram. My record so far is 1.5 kilograms after coming out of these places. For anybody who is going on the, I think it's the imperial system or whatever, dealing with pounds, you're looking at about, I think it's 2.2 pounds to a kilogram. So you lose so much water weight when you go in there, and it's the best thing in the world. You come out just lean the fuck out. Pardon my language. Hope I'm not swearing too much. And it's wonderful. So this picturesque onsen town where we chilled around all everywhere in our cool like traditional pajamas, moving from onsen to onsen, was a really great experience. And then it was actually kind of similar to Kyoto. If you haven't been to Kyoto, one of the defining features of it is that there are these canals frequently everywhere that run adjacent to the river, which is the Kamogawa, and sort of the main feature here. And all along these canals, you find awesome restaurants, and restaurants that will then like have patios that are out on the canal or out on the Kamogawa, and it's wonderful. And we went to this place. I think the name of the restaurant was just Off. I have to check this, but easily ranks. I've now had just recently another like most amazing dinner of my entire life, but Off was like, it's up there. It was top 3 again too, and it was kind of deceiving because you would look at it and you would see something that just said ham, and you're like, well, how good could ham be? But then it comes out with like homemade like that pepper seed mustard with all the like little grainy bits in it, and with this thick sliced ham that was incredible. Amazing pastas. We had a couple of bottles of wine. This is our brunch. Ludicrous. One of the best things I've ever done in Japan. I really, really appreciate the experience, and thanks very much for Chai for inviting me out for that. I really enjoyed it. Now, what I want to follow up with is, now speaking about the place that I just went to fairly recently. Photographs from this will show up on my Instagram in pretty short order as I also resurrect how active I've been on there as well. The place is called Koyasan, and Koyasan is in Kansai, obviously, and if you head sort of southwest of Kyoto, you arrive at it. It's in, the place nearest would be called Wakayama. These are all places that I'm learning about since I've been in Kansai. And Koyasan, let me give you a little more preamble to this. Also look at the clock. Okay, we're doing good. I've always said since I've been in Japan that while I am impressed by many of the old forests that you might find here, because there are a couple that nothing has ever compared to where I'm from on Vancouver Island, this place called Cathedral Grove. Look it up after you listen to the podcast and check out the trees here. And this is like a hippie's spiritual paradise, Cathedral Grove. These trees are ancient. This is the word you have to use. They're massive. Like 12 people arm's length could go around one of these trees in Cathedral Grove, and I'd never seen anything like it before while in Japan, though I had seen some really amazing places and forests. Koyasan totally changed that. So Koyasan has trees there that are easily 1,000 years old. You're looking like, prehistoric may not be the right word, but it grasps at like what I'm trying to convey, in that these things are daunting, impressive, huge, and that gives it this sort of supernatural quality already when you're there. And in Koyasan, in this incredible forest of these ancient, massive, towering trees, is one of the oldest cemeteries in Japan. And it has within it the tombs of some of the most historically significant people in Japan. Like, I think the Tokugawa family has some tombs there, and Nobunaga has a tomb there. Don't quote me on this. But more the point is basically that some of the most important historical figures, you can look it up yourself. But I have never, it is the most beautiful place in Japan that I have ever seen. As you walk amidst these towering trees, and you have all of these graves and tombs, and they're covered in all different types of moss and lichen, and it's gorgeous. And then I was lucky enough to be there for a day where it was quite beautiful and sunny. But to be completely honest with you, I think it would be best experienced in the rain. I think there would be a sort of melancholy, and maybe not melancholy, but an added peacefulness that the rain would bring to it. I frequently talk about Lisa in Japan, somebody I'd love to have down to Garden Lab that we could host her here, doing great stuff. And one of her reels, which I most enjoyed, I think it was one of the first reels that I saw go by for her on Instagram, was at Koyasan and during the rain, really capturing how beautiful it is there. And to tell you a little more of why I was there, actually, it's cool. It wasn't just to visit. It was that one of the first people that I'd reached out to when I moved to Kyoto was the lovely Yi Zhang, and I've done a couple videos with her on the Wow to You channel while I was still contracted out to them. And she has a friend who is a monk or nun. I don't know. Do you still call a female person a monk? Anyways, a friend who was a spiritualist, who was a monk there, who had like a quite fascinating experience of life where from a young age she felt connected to this other world, to this kind of spirit world. Now, my job is not when and she wanted to tell the story. Yi did. She was like, I think this would be an incredible story. Her friend in combination with the surrounding of Koyasan could be something quite beautiful. And so for me, to tell that story, it has nothing to do with how accurate it may be that this person is or is not connected to another world we can't see. My job, as I see it, is to tell the story. So that's how I went into it, with an open mind, just to go there, to meet her friend, to document her, to interview her, to experience Koyasan. And open mind always pays off. She was such a cool lady, really, really fascinating. And we had great interviews. We have great footage. It's going to turn into something very, very, very special. And I will be putting that video on a soon-to-launch channel, which I'm making a whole new YouTube channel, which will be Studio Garden Lab, which is I'm head of that studio, and this will be sort of our pro bono supplementary work that we're doing while we are doing our contracted jobs. It's going to be to tell the story of Koyasan and this woman, and it will be exceptional. Also will be the last bit of serious filmmaking, you might say, that I'll have done on this camera that I'm recording now, because I'm getting the mega update to the Canon R5C, which is very exciting. Time check. Okay, we're doing good this time. Time isn't quite so rapidly moving as it was for the first half, which makes me think I could talk about a few more things, which is good. Gonna revolutionize things. So, like, let me go on a little bit of a tangent there. This is for the film nerds. This is for the gear nerds. Basically, if you think about it this way, I use the Sony A6500, and I bought that back in 2017. And then you have to think that when I bought it, the body was not just released, and so this technology is even that much older even than that. The Canon R5C was only available, you could only pre-order it, and it only became released to the public as of April, and I'm only now getting mine mid-May, and I pre-ordered this thing. So we're talking 2022 technology, we're talking full-frame sensor, and I went with one of the L series lenses from Canon. So we're talking about creating a whole different level of production values when I'm going to be making things. That's all I'll say about that, so I don't just nerd for 30 minutes on the sort of stuff that I create. Let's move towards talking about. I had this cool conversation with my buddy recently who came to visit. Name's Graham. He came here for Golden Week. It was really cool. And linked to a few different topics, but we were going on about self-delusion and how it's important to look around your mental space and see if there is something that you are not acknowledging, which is changing the way in which you are behaving. So really, really simple. If you were to imagine that there is some stress in your life and that stress is causing you to have kind of uneven reactions to the sort of things going on in your life. So, for example, it could be as simple as you have a bill that's upcoming and you're not sure how you're going to pay it, but then you're just a dick when you're hanging out with your friends because of that undue pressure, and where for them, they just see you acting like a dick, but they don't realize the way that you're acting might as well be you. When you say something cruel to them, you might as well say, I'm afraid I can't pay this bill. That's what you would say to them, but you can't see that. You're lost in a bit of self-delusion. And so how important it is to look around if you're feeling down and to identify, is that because somebody's like really rubbing you the wrong way, or something truly is going wrong in the moment that you're becoming angry, or is it related back to something that is making you behave in that way? And so this sort of first level, this tertiary layer of examination where you think, am I being self-manipulated by something that it is that I need to deal with? And how important it is to kind of do that frequent checkup. This is essentially a form of mindfulness, and we'd be a lot more peaceful and a lot more, I think, content in our lives if we did it frequently. So I thought that's something to talk about. That's something, as I speak to you now, that's something that I speak to you because I like to remind myself of. And then the other thing, we took this another layer further where I was like, okay, so this is important. You can do that first check and look around and see that everything is apparently fine. And so it's confusing because, well, you went to all this effort to be mindful and to consider that there might be some stress that's causing you to behave in a less than how you would like to act way. But then the next level of this is the deeper level of self-delusion, where there is something which you have, as you are categorizing the things in your mind that are accountable for your behavior, you've checked this one off as fine, and it's really not. It's more like, it's fine. it's that. That's how you can think about it. And then if ever you need to say to yourself when asked the question, how do you feel about something? And your response is, it's fine. It's probably not fine. You're probably upset about it still. And these are things that cause even further confusion, because probably it's become that way for the fact that you don't want to deal with how you are probably linked to why it's going wrong. So it would be that, for example, you had an argument with a friend, you finished that argument, and then because you're so angry, whatever they had to say, whatever you said, this argument is finished, you won the argument, check, it's fine, that should leave me alone. But deep down you know that you actually were not so righteous in what it is that you had to say, and you're deluding yourself to say that when you called them a potato, that wasn't an incredibly hurtful thing to say, and it shouldn't be fine. It should be you owning that you caused some damage there. So I liked examining the idea of that we have these things where, because we can't face that we need to do something, we need to have some kind of penance, we need to have some kind of reconciliation for our actions, that we bury them deeper. You can, if you imagine it, it's like you're looking around your like mental landscape. You think of inside of your head as like this thing that you're looking at, but then those items are camouflaged, and they're camouflaged behind you thinking or wanting to believe that you hadn't done anything wrong or that you don't need to change anything. But actually, if you really peel away that camouflage, you see underneath, it's you glaring back, knowing full well that there was something you did wrong and you haven't reconciled that fact yet. And I thought, oh, that's a cool thought. That's something that I know I've done, where I think that I have peace with something. I'm like, moving along, that's fine. But when I really think about it, I realize that that's me not wanting to own the fact that there is some responsibility that I have towards improving that or addressing it in a way that I have so far not. I thought that was cool. That was something I thought I'll make a little note here about self-delusion and how useful it is to like be mindful of that as well. Now, next thing, if you've listened before, you know I like to talk about health stuff too, because that's important to me. Today I'm back in the gym. We're back on a regular schedule. I will train occasionally with what is essentially Thor, this friend that I've met and talked about on the podcast before. His name's Alex. He's the head of the Kinobi Gin distillery here in Kyoto. Amazing dude, every level, great guy, good friend. I was in the gym, and just today I tried, because I'd never gone for this weight before, 130 kilograms. I can't do the math right away. If you just doubled it, I know it's 2.2 pounds per each kilogram, but then you could say I'm basically at well over 260 pounds, I guess, if you just double that, and then it's then some, because it's 2.2. So that was really cool. I only got to about 3 reps, but it was more like less to do with the muscles and more to do with the central nervous system was just not ready for this. But then I'm totally happy to talk about. I'm totally happy to talk about depression. I think it's important actually to talk about depression for yourself. When you, again, it's like this thing that when you observe in your mind, you're like, I'm not depressed. And you're like, if you tell yourself that, it can be true, but a lot of the times if you say it like that, I'm not depressed, then you probably are depressed about something. And it's good then you first acknowledge it, and then you figure out why it is that you're depressed. And you can then get past it, as opposed to it festering and becoming this part of yourself that becomes stagnant and rotting. And so I care about health. I want to improve on that, and I care about a lot of the reasons I would be healthy, a lot of the reasons that I would work out, that I do the deadlifts, that I do all that stuff, is to deal with depression, or like to provide some sort of armor against weird dips that can occur for sort of inexplicable reasons. And I was thinking of the different things that can bring on depression or compound depression recently. And for me, the thing that I was thinking of, and it's more something I know already, but it's great to revisit again, is depression as caused by your diet. And I've just noticed more and more, and I think you get in tune with this as you get a little bit older, that you're not so rubbery, you don't bounce back so easily from the poor choices that you make in your diet, that I so notice now the difference in mood between if I've eaten healthy in a day and if I've eaten shite in the course of a day. And so it led me to actually describe, if you want antidepressants, it's good food. If you eat good food, it's an insane antidepressant. And I know that now from it's personal, anecdotal kind of evidence of this, but whenever I know anybody else to take that on as wise, that their lives are improved as well. So if you're wondering why you might feel depressed, yes, of course, it could be that person in the lineup next to you was really, really rude to you. But I think actually these things where that can often seemingly be the source of where our depression or frustration comes from in our day-to-day, that actually it's more linked to these other details that are going on in our life. Are we well slept? Have we eaten well? Have we exercised? And it's really, really coming into focus for me recently, just how much, if I'm having a down day and I look back at the sort of stuff that I've eaten over the course of that day, there is a very, very high likelihood that it's been nutritionally void, and whatever I've had is not helping me in any way whatsoever. So I want to leave you with, before we wrap this up, a recipe that I've had for the morning. I call it a recipe. It's so easy. It's ludicrous, but it's so good. And I have a few simple ingredients that are really going to make it good for you in the morning. It's cheap too. So what you do is you get Greek yogurt, plain, so it's like real tangy, that kind of thing, and it has a super high protein content to it as well. So you get the Greek yogurt. Now you're going to add in banana and strawberries. You could do blueberries or something else, but I mean, I really like the banana and strawberries. I think I might do blueberries soon, but you do those two. And then you add a little bit of whole oats on top of that. That's really, really good. You get there. And then you put a little bit of honey, Not too much honey. If you put too much honey on, then it actually kind of messes with the texture of everything. But you just put a little bit of honey on top. And then my first secret ingredient on there, which really works well with like the savory sweet and all that, this stuff going on, it's a little bit of salt. I got a little Himalayan rock salt, and I crack that over top. That works really, really good. And then the final form of this incredible, healthy, get-up-and-go breakfast that I've been doing, this breakfast fruit yogurt bowl, is mint. Get yourself some mint. Chop it up, fine, not so finely, it doesn't matter. It is the combination of Greek yogurt and mint. It is just a sponge for the flavor of the mint that it absorbs into the yogurt, and it is amazing. And what's awesome about this is that where frequently we feel like to eat healthy, we might make some compromise. It's not going to be as delicious. This tastes fucking delicious. You'll absolutely love it. It's so good. Finishing on that note, thank you so much for listening. I'm stoked to be back doing the podcast again. Whether it's myself or a guest that I have on next time, there will be another guest. We're going to go to have these out. Basically, it's going to be 4 month, once a week that I'll have them up. I hesitate to overpromise like a specific day that I release them on because things might be a little bit hectic trying to get that done. But if I can, it'll be coming out basically every Monday that we'll have it turn over. Thank you so much for listening to this. You can watch it on the actual YouTube channel itself, and then you can see my ugly mug talk whilst I go about this. Or, of course, it's on all the different places that you might listen, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so on, and everywhere else. Do my usual appeal that if you really, really like this, check out my Patreon at davetrippin. That's the best way to support me. If not, I just appreciate your company, and I hope that you're doing well. That's all. Catch you in the next one. Peace.